This image is a woodcut from 1643 illustration of the perceived danger of the king's body politic. These days, the body politic, made up of the people of a nation, considered collectively as an organised group of citizens. In 1643, the body politic was the king, and the citizens made up his body, of which he was to protect like a father. Here, the body politic is shown as a half papist and half cavalier, the kingdom's monster uncloaked from heaven, depicted the menace to England as a triple-headed monster. Each of the creature's three heads represented the supports of the king and the great threat to England which they possessed: the papists or Catholics, the malignants or royalists, and the bloody Irish. Each of these heads are made up of further individual heads of each members of each of the dangerous groups. Anti-Catholicism is a major theme in the 17th century. Nevertheless, in reality, Catholics made up between 2 and 5% of the population and were subject to several penal laws. These laws meant that they could be fined for not attending Anglican services, banned from holding military or political office. However, these laws were not enforced religiously, and most Catholics lived a harmonious life. Sometimes, anti-Catholic feeling could flare up depending on the political situation. This lecture will attempt to highlight some of these times when anti-Catholic feeling flared up. Last lecture was about dissenters from the established religion. This lecture intends to assess the threat level of Catholicism between 1625 and 1688. Knowledge-wise, you'll be able to explain the historic growth of anti-Catholic feeling. Skills-wise, to consider the interconnectivity of nonconformity, conformity and Catholicism between 1625 and 1688, and behaviourally, to assess the threat level of Catholicism to the English state between 1625 and 1688. As we have covered, before 1533, England was a Catholic nation, loyal to the Catholic Church, and the mass of people in England were Catholic. It was due to Henry VIII's very personal reasons that England broke away from the Church of Rome and became a Protestant nation. His children caused a pendulum swing of religious belief in England. Edward VI took the Church of England to almost full Protestant. Mary I took the Church back to Rome, faced opposition from Protestants and burnt 300 heretics in a 2-year period. Elizabeth I took the Church of England back to a middle way church, like her father Henry VIII. However, later in her reign, she became more anti-Catholic in response to Spanish actions against England. This top-down reformation in England led to what Lawrence Stone calls the rise of the gentry, which we will look at in the next section, and the idea of a Puritan choir in England as put forward by Neil. When considering the reasons for the rise of anti-Catholicism, there are several events which cause and exacerbate the anti-Catholic feeling in England. Queen Mary, who came to the throne with a massive support, replaced the 9-day Queen, Lady Jane Grey, who was Protestant. This suggests ultimately that in 1553, the English people were not concerned with being ruled by a Catholic. However, after 20 years of Protestantism in England, many had converted or been born a Protestant. In attempting to return England to Catholicism, Mary persecuted Protestants, and between 1556 and 1558, Mary ordered the execution by burning of 300 Protestants. When Elizabeth ascended the throne in 1558, John Foxe began working on his book of Protestant Martyrs. In 1562, the first edition was published and contained the stories of Christians who had died for their beliefs. It also contained over 100 woodcuts of the deaths of these martyrs. In 1571, a copy of the book was authorised to be chained next to the Great Bible in every cathedral. The book has also been continually updated to this date and is freely available online. In 1585, Spain and England entered conflict. It was never formally declared, but Spain, following papal guidance, began its campaign against England until James I negotiated peace in 1604. This followed the excommunication of Elizabeth and the execution of the Catholic Queen, Mary of Scots. In 1588, Spain launched its first armada against England to abject failure. The success of England gave rise to a belief that England was under the protection of God and was therefore on the right path. Post the Armada, England also saw a Catholic uprising in Ireland and a growth of Jesuit priests coming into England. Due to this, Elizabeth's policy towards Catholicism became harsher. In 1605, the most famous failed terror attack on English soil happened. A group of Catholic rebels attempted to blow up Parliament, containing the royal family and the English ruling elite. If this succeeded, 5/11 would have wiped out all government in England, bringing anarchy. Every November 5th since, England has celebrated this event, even during the civil wars. It has been used to justify the divine nature of monarchy, while also proving divine support of the parliamentary model. In 1618, the 30 Years' War begins with the defenestration of Prague. Over the next 30 years, Catholics and Protestant nations fight over their rights to choose their religion. The war's impact is huge in the development of international relationships and the ideas of international law and the nation state. The growth of anti-Catholic feeling in the 1630s was a response to the Laudian reforms. These reforms were highly regarded as taking the Church of England in a Catholic direction. Parliament was also concerned with the influence of Catholics in the court of Charles I. The Queen was an ardent Catholic, and Henrietta Maria would very openly attend Catholic Mass at Somerset House, which saw large crowds. She also greatly influenced Charles I and many of his courtiers. As a response, Catholicism became popular at court, and many members of the Privy Council identified as Catholics. The view that the government during the personal rule was taking a pro-Catholic line saw rumours that the Pope had offered to make Laud a cardinal. The Pope also sent envoys to visit Charles in 1634, and Spanish ships docked in England for restocking during the 30 Years' War. In 1637, George Conn arrived in London as the official papal ambassador. There was a general feeling that Catholicism was a facet of absolutism, as seen in France and Spain. Charles I's personal rule was also seen as an attempt to establish an absolute monarchy. Therefore, the next logical step was Charles I must also be a Catholic. During the Republican years, there was little hostility towards Catholics. The laws to control and persecute Catholics were not repealed, but Cromwell did not carry out any persecutions of Catholics. He did allow the general fear of Catholicism to grow with news stories of their butchery in Europe, but did not act upon this fear. Between the Restoration and the Glorious Revolution, anti-Catholic fears grew. Charles II's wife, Catherine of Braganza, was a Catholic, as was James II's second wife, Mary of Modena. Charles II's wife came to England with 30 Catholic priests and re-established Catholic influence at court. The Treaty of Dover in 1670 helped to increase this anti-Catholic feeling. France had been fighting many wars in Europe as it became clear that France was becoming the new superpower over that of Spain. When in 1672 Charles II entered the war against the Netherlands in support of Louis XIV, starting the Second Dutch War, many MPs saw this as an opportunity to attack Catholic influences at court. The result was the Test Act of 1673, which excluded Catholics from military and civil offices. This actually made the King's brother, James, the Duke of York, resign as Admiral of the Navy. The real high point of anti-Catholic feeling came with the Popish plot and the rumour that Jesuits intended to assassinate Charles II and place James on the throne. The plot was a complete fabrication, but widely believed, highlighting the anti-Catholic feeling in all social classes in England. When James II came to the throne, the anti-Catholic feeling goes into overdrive after the Declaration of Indulgences and the birth of his Catholic son. This lecture intended for you to assess the threat level of Catholicism between 1625 and 1688. Knowledge-wise, you will now be able to explain the historic growth of anti-Catholic feeling. Skills-wise, after completing your associated materials, you will be considering the interconnectivity of non-conformity, conformity in Catholicism between 1625 and 1688. Behaviourally, Again, after completing the associated materials, you will assess the threat level of Catholicism to the English state between 1625 and 1688. Now complete the associated materials.